Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, a queen wished for a child with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. Her wish came true, and she named the baby Snow White. Tragically, the queen died shortly after Snow White's birth. The king remarried, bringing a new queen into the castle, one who was beautiful, but wicked and vain. The new queen possessed a magic mirror that she consulted daily. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of them all?" The mirror always replied, "You, O queen!" As Snow White grew, her beauty surpassed that of her stepmother. The magic mirror eventually answered, "Snow White is the fairest of them all." Consumed by jealousy, the queen decided Snow White must die. She ordered a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and kill her, bringing back her heart as proof. The huntsman led Snow White deep into the forest, but couldn't bring himself to harm her. He confessed the queen's plot and urged Snow White to flee. He took a wild animal's heart to the queen. Terrified and alone, Snow White ran through the dark, menacing forest. She encountered strange creatures and shadows, but they did not harm her. Exhausted, Snow White stumbled upon a small, quaint cottage. She knocked but received no answer. Desperate for shelter, she entered the cottage. Inside, Snow White found everything in miniature: tiny furniture, small dishes, and 7 little beds. She marveled at the cottage's coziness and neatness. Snow White decided to clean the cottage as a gesture of gratitude. She swept, dusted, and tidied up, making the place sparkle. Then she lay down across 3 of the small beds and fell asleep. The cottage belonged to 7 dwarfs who worked in a nearby diamond mine. They returned home to find their cottage spotless and Snow White asleep. The dwarfs, Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey, were surprised and cautious. They wondered who this beautiful girl was and why she was in their home. When Snow White awoke, she explained her story to the dwarfs. They listened intently and, moved by her plight, invited her to stay with them. Snow White quickly adapted to her new life. She took on the role of housekeeper, cooking delicious meals and keeping the cottage clean while the dwarfs worked in the mine. Back at the castle, the queen asked her mirror, "Who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "Snow White, who lives with the 7 dwarfs." The queen was furious to learn Snow White was still alive. She vowed to take matters into her own hands and devised a plan to kill Snow White herself. The queen disguised herself as an old peddler woman. She prepared a poisoned apple, which would put Snow White into a death-like sleep. The queen traveled to the dwarf's cottage. Knowing the dwarfs would be away working, she knocked on the door, calling out for Snow White. Snow White, seeing a harmless old woman, opened the door. The queen offered her the beautiful red apple, convincing her it was a magic wishing apple. Snow White took a bite of the apple and immediately fell to the ground unconscious. The queen cackled in triumph and left, believing Snow White was dead. When the dwarfs returned home from the mine that evening, they found Snow White lying on the floor, seemingly lifeless. They tried to revive her, but to no avail. Heartbroken, the dwarfs placed Snow White in a glass coffin, unable to bury her because of her enduring beauty. They kept watch over her day and night. A prince, who had heard the tales of Snow White's beauty and kindness, came upon the dwarf's cottage and saw her in the glass coffin. He was captivated by her and asked to take her to his castle. The dwarfs agreed. and as the prince lifted Snow White, he kissed her. The kiss broke the spell, and Snow White awoke, much to everyone's amazement and joy. Snow White and the prince were overjoyed. The dwarfs celebrated her return to life, and Snow White thanked them for their care and kindness. Back at the castle, the magic mirror informed the queen that Snow White was alive and well. She decided to attend the wedding, plotting to kill Snow White herself. However, Snow White and the prince recognized the queen immediately. They ordered her to be brought before the court. As punishment for her evil deeds, the wicked queen was forced to wear a pair of red-hot iron shoes and dance until she fell down dead. Snow White and the prince were married in a grand ceremony, attended by the dwarfs and people from all over the kingdom. The celebrations lasted for days. Under the rule of Snow White and the prince, the kingdom flourished. The people loved their kind and fair rulers, and peace reigned throughout the land. The prince was admired for his leadership and courage. Together with Snow White, they made their kingdom a place of fairness and joy. And so the wicked queen met her end, and Snow White lived happily ever after with her prince, beloved by all.